Try Belize.
Yeah, that's right. Belize is like the old expats.
Okay, we're having a little fun off camera because there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about. But welcome back to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Emily Volpintesta, co-host. Henry Pietras, our esteemed guest. We're looking maybe to get Al Robinson to come in. He's doing something. He's at an undisclosed location down at the courthouse, looking for some information on someone who shall go nameless. But and Joe Niola perhaps will step in as we move along in the show. But continue on where we left off. Well, we'll say last night because this is the show from last night. But continue on with your discussion about the information about the Democratic primaries and what's happening.
Well, what we were talking about right before we left was about the voting process, especially the first round, and you were walking us through that. So what happens when all the delegates get there? What's the game?
This is in Philadelphia?
Yes.
I'm suspecting that probably what will happen is that the Clinton folks will be apprised of the situation in advance, and when you get to the point where you start to actually do the voting, where the delegates actually announce who they're representing state by state, you'll find that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, or whoever is actually in charge, I think it'll be her, will step to the podium, bang her gavel and say, I have a request for a vote by acclamation for the candidate to represent us in the presidential election in November. And she'll she'll just call out for a voice vote, and there'll be a gasp from our folks, and there'll be a Clinton or whatever from the Clinton folks, and bang, it'll be done, and there'll never actually be a reading of the delegates state by state.
Oh, that's why you were saying before that it depends on someone's hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, and they'll clearly establish this process in advance.
Right.
And because what they want to do, what the establishment of either party would love to do, is to cut out any bickering, cut out any discussion, cut out any platform issue discussion,
Revotes.
And if they have to shut down the 45%,
right,
which is what we'll have there, maybe a little bit more, but at least 45% of the delegates going in from the primaries and caucuses, they'll want to shut down any discussion about anything and unify the party. And even if that means slapping 45% of the delegates who were there in the face, they'll do that, and then afterwards they'll try to make up. They'll try to you don't want that horrible Donald Trump to be president, which is true. And Bernie Sanders has said very clearly the objective is to not have Donald Trump as president. But we know from exit polling through the entire campaign process and campaign and convention process for both the Republican and the Democratic Party so far that there are two candidates that stand out as the least trustworthy candidates. Of all the candidates going in, the least trustworthy candidates, the least trustworthy candidate, Donald Trump. And the second least trustworthy candidate is
Hillary Clinton. So
now,
how have they gotten this far in the election then?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question. But now on the other side of the coin, because it's always good to mention the positive side of every dark cloud has a silver lining, and every silver lining has a dark cloud behind it. But the two candidates going in that were deemed by voters as being the most trustworthy candidates are Bernie Sanders and John Kasich. And what I wouldn't give personally for a John Kasich, Bernie Sanders election, where they talk about the issues,
right,
both have strong track records in what they've done, Bernie Sanders in the House and the Senate, and as mayor of Burlington, Vermont. John Kasich is governor of Ohio, and I think he's also been in Congress, but his bona fides were established as governor of the state of Ohio. He's successful. He's made Ohio a much better state than what it was when he arrived in the governor's mansion. So there you go. So that in a nutshell is what I predict will happen.
Well, what will be the next step? Let's say vote by acclamation doesn't work. What happens next?
Well, it will work and it'll be over. It will work and it'll be over. That'll be the end of it. Now, what will happen? What will our 45% of the delegates do? I was alive. I was at Atlantic City with my mom and dad before Atlantic City became a gambling mecca. It was just a beach resort in 1968 when the Democratic Convention took place in Chicago. And it's been described as a rigged convention. They used to all be rigged. They used to be all behind the scenes, smoke-filled rooms, the backroom dealing. But the Democratic Party had a number of good candidates. Unfortunately, they lost perhaps their best candidate in June of that year when Bobby Kennedy was murdered. But they had some good candidates, and out of the convention floor, all of a sudden, Hubert Humphrey was the candidate representing. Eugene McCarthy was cast aside. Good candidates were cast aside, and we ended up with, and I wasn't voting then. I was still 15 years old that year. But
Humphrey?
we ended up with Hubert Humphrey as the candidate, and we all know that Richard Nixon won the election, and the rest is history.
Right, yeah. Well, the concern in the Philadelphia Convention is we already have an inkling as to the gaming that's already going on. There are at least three platforms at the Democratic Convention, or three committees. One is in charge of platform, one is rules and regulation, and one is credentials. Platform, Bernie submitted for all of these positions. There's 25 positions in each one of these committees.
So a total of 75 positions to be filled.
And Bernie submitted 40 names.
Okay, I'm sure.
And so far, number one, only one person got appointed to each one from the Bernie camp. In addition, the leaders have already been selected or appointed. The leader of the platform is Governor Malloy.
Yeah.
And the leader of Rules and Regulation is Barney Frank.
Who are both big supporters of Hillary Clinton.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So from the viewpoint of gaming and fairness, and Bernie is all about fairness, this is not fair. Somebody's not playing fair. And,
now, I think I'm sure that you did mention that Bernie put in 40 names for presumably looking at about half of the 75 people.
Yep.
I'm sure that there were at least 40 names put in by Hillary. There probably was some limitations on how many. I'm sure the Clinton campaign probably put in 40 names also. But the bottom line is it looks like they're going to get the bulk of the people.
So then
on all
the platform
three of
will
the
be Hillary's platform, not Bernie's. And as I said in the previous show, the idea is that we will be watching, and the Bernie people will be watching, and making sure that how fairly the platform is Bernie's platform is reflected in the Democratic agenda, how well the rules and regulations that they want to change, like superdelegates, are allowed to go on or eliminated.
Right.
Those kinds of things are going to be what burners will look for to see whether or not they will support the Democrats going forward.
Here's the go ahead.
Well, who are the people that choose? There's one, like you said, the one Bernie supporter out of 40. Who chooses these?
That was an appointment because he sent the list of names to Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Oh, okay, so she's
the one who controls pretty much the whole show.
Got it. Okay.
So how much of a say burners have in this whole process will determine, whether or not there will be any settling going on.
Right. Yeah.
Because on day one, the party wants everyone to settle.
Right.
Back to the question. Why and how in the world did Donald Trump make it to the studded point of being the least trustworthy candidate of all the candidates? And there were 18 Republicans and five Democrats going in to the primaries. How did Donald Trump become the least trustworthy candidate? And how did Hillary Clinton become the second least trustworthy candidate? And I think the common denominator is their positions on issues. Donald Trump has been all over the place. If you could find an issue from choice to any other issue, Donald Trump's been on every spot on every issue at one time or another in his career.
Right.
And if you're a businessman, you're a politician, there's really not much difference. The common denominator is you negotiate and you try to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So to differentiate him as not being a politician, I think is patently unfair. So that's why Donald Trump is the least trustworthy of all the candidates in the eyes of voters. Why is Hillary Clinton the second least trustworthy? Well, pretty much the same thing. You look at the issues and you look at where she's been over her lifetime and over her career, as First Lady of the United States, as a senator from New York State, as the Secretary of State. She's been pretty much everywhere on every issue too. Maybe not choice. I'll give her that one. I think she's been pretty consistent on choice.
Not gay rights.
Now on gay rights, no, not consistent. But then again, I'll give her a little leeway on that too, because that's an evolving issue. Even our President Obama, has evolved on that issue. So I want to give her some leeway on that.
Thank you, Joe Biden.
Thank you, Joe Biden. But there are some other very important issues recently which she's changed her opinion on dramatically. One, hydrofracturing, which we call fracking, where as Secretary of State, she was sent around the world to sell hydrofracturing to other countries as a means of getting energy out of the ground. So she became, as Secretary of State, the chief salesperson for hydrofracturing.
Wow.
And if only America counts, if the rest of the world matters for nothing, then I can say that maybe that's not so bad. But what a person does in a position of authority around the world in representing the United States of America is very important to me personally. And I think it should be now. Now that fracking has become such a hot button issue in the Democratic Party, and we're so very profoundly against it for many reasons that we could spend an entire show going into, now she's against it. Okay, another one. We were talking about this. Help me with this, because this fracking, Trans-Pacific Partnership.
TPP, yeah.
The latest in the long line of trade deals which have hurt the American worker. And
like what?
Well, it hasn't passed yet. Okay, she was negotiating.
Yep.
Hillary was involved in negotiating it, and it's still more or less secret.
It's not the law of the land yet, and all the details of it haven't come out. But I think it's fairly safe to say that based on our past history with trade deals, that starting with NAFTA, that every trade deal has hurt American workers. As a matter of fact, it's hurt workers all over the world. Because when jobs leave America, at the behest of corporations, when they move jobs overseas to countries where people work for less, and then later on, when they move from that country to another country where people work for even less, that's something which does not benefit American workers if you want to keep it on a personal American level.
If you keep it at the worker level, that's one of the arguments. If you keep it at the ability to make messes, okay, we have an EPA that is fairly effective, okay, but there are other countries that really don't have an EPA. So if you can dump all the mess and not be responsible, they'll go for it because it's less. It's less cost.
Yeah, the profit from manufacturing stays with the company. The cost later on of cleaning up the mess that the company makes, that becomes public.
Yeah,
we
that
as
becomes
taxpayers,
a super fund.
We as taxpayers pay for the cleanup of something that was profitable to a company. Yeah. Now, a quick shout out, because we don't do many shout outs to Richard Nixon. But the EPA was begun during the Nixon administration, and was a noble effort to take care of something. And you used to be just about able to walk across Lake Erie. I mean, the fish, the dead fish in Lake Erie, you get these wash-ups on shore of just in huge numbers of fishes from the pollution which was dumped into the lake. And the lake is probably in better condition now than it was back then. So the EPA has done some great things. It's up against a very difficult Republican Congress, which is trying to cut it off, if not just decimate it entirely. But back to the beginning, back to Richard Nixon. Thank you. Continue on with the discussion about the what's coming down the pipe in the different states and for the convention coming up.
Well, with the states, we have, I think, 8 states left over, and California is the big one. It's on June 7th. So that will be really the make or break Bernie moment.
Really? Is that the last one?
Yeah, there's 475 delegates.
Wow.
So, it's, we're probably, dreaming, but it's possible that you could get, a 280 delegate advantage. That's really dreaming, because normally the difference between the two is maybe like 10 points. So, so Bernie is 55, she's 45. If you do proportional delegates, there's not enough of a differential to get the delegates. But the reality is that the Bernie platform that he's been talking about is really about a common good. It's looking towards the future, and that's why Bernie says a future to believe in.
Right.
And despite the fact that we lost Connecticut, we're still saying a future to still believe in, because the platform that he talks about benefits everyone. And maybe right now there's not enough pain for everybody to see it, but when the pain becomes big enough the cause becomes big enough, people will take matters into their own hands.
Well, this is historical. This is throughout the history of the United States. We go through these cycles. We had cycle back in the beginning of the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century, where you had kids working in putting their hands in the coal scuttles and separating out coals, and then by the time they were 10 or 12 years old, they were missing half of their fingers.
Right.
So we had child labor, and unions arose.
Right.
Unions fought against child labor and got kids into schools where they belong.
Right.
You had the public school system.
Yeah. No,
took root, and now kids are every child in America.
That's right.
Is entitled to an education through grade 12.
Right.
I'd like to bring up another idea here about Bernie's platform.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, a lot of the stuff that happens in this country is despite what the government, which by the way is us, is doing. Okay. So some programs, like solar, for instance, it's happening despite the industry objecting to it, saying it's way too expensive and so on. It's not.
Which it isn't. Yeah.
Okay, because if you include all the assumptions, solar is actually cheaper than what we're doing now. And assumptions being things like pollution, health effects, or damage to the overall population health. If you can put those numbers include in the cost assumptions, I think clean energy comes way ahead.
The aftermarket costs, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the thing about what the citizens are actually going forward with the things that are the common good. But in Connecticut, we actually have a program which I just started participating because they're now spreading it out throughout Connecticut. It's called the Governor's Council on Climate Change.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a meeting in Waterbury, and actually there were 8 locations all over Connecticut. We participated in a video conference, and the idea is that they're looking long-term thinking. Okay, they're talking about 2050, and they're talking about reducing pollution levels by 2050 by 80%. From 2001 levels. Okay, we're way on our way towards meeting that goal, because right now the 2020 goal is to reduce pollution by 20% over 2001 levels. Okay, so there's a conversation of people, and most of the people at that meeting where I was, there were 20 people there, were Bernie people. Okay. So Bernie people are getting involved in the conversation, not just in the politicking, but also in making the change that is what I consider the common good.
Concern for the future. Concern for young people. Concern for not just the young people now, but our children, our grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and so on and so forth down the line.
Do you think
Very
there's
important.
a chance of Bernie being vice president?
Yeah, Roberto Perez, our director, Roberto Perez, tossed us that question, and let's.
I'm going to be agnostic about that, David. Up to you. I think that's speculation. I'm trying to do what Bernie does, which is try to stay
focus on the here and now.
Well, not just that, but also the platform, the issues, and
okay. Not about him.
Well,
per se.
Well, Bernie is only 1% of what needs to happen. Okay, even if he becomes president, we still have so much work to do.
Yeah.
And it's still on us.
People who are participating in these processes and having their voices heard and their agendas acted on. Okay. You go to any town meeting, and what you hear is the people who are participating, they're very good about championing their causes, their agendas, okay? But there's not a lot of black people there, okay?
Or Hispanic.
And if Al were here, I would tell him, Al, roll up your sleeves, come and get involved. Take these people by the hand, teach them what you need, and show them, tell them what your agenda is, and try to affect it by participating, not expecting somebody else to champion your cause, because they don't know what your causes are.
Well, in Al's defense, he's been very active on a lot of fronts and a lot of levels to accomplish these things, but his overall observation of how the African American vote has played out for the Democratic Party, and I believe African Americans make up about 30% of the voters that are registered Democrats in the country. And it breaks down by demographic, breaks down by age. It's really got nothing to do with where your grandparents came from or what what your race is, ethnic group. Any of that doesn't play out. Up to the age of 45, people whose hearts are more invested in the future of our country and the future of our planet,
more democratic,
vote for Bernie Sanders. You get above that 55 demographic, and sorry to say that's a big bulk of the voters.
I'll spin it slightly differently.
Trump? Is that it?
Well, go for Clinton.
I'll spin it a little differently because 28%, as far as I know, are Republicans in this country, of voters. 30% are Democrats, and the remaining 42, guess what, are independents. Okay? The one thing that Bernie hasn't seen reflected in the voting is the independents. If we gets by the primary, and he gets into the general election, the independents are the ones who will determine who becomes president.
They've had for decades.
And guess
been
who
independent
wins the
voters
independents?
The
Guess
Democrats.
Who wins the independents? Okay, I'll turn it around.
Okay.
All right, Bernie's won 19 primaries or caucuses.
Okay.
They were all open one way or another. He's won none that were closed primaries.
What do you mean by open and closed?
Well, open, anyone can vote. You declare what you want to vote for, you walk up to and you do it. If it's closed, like in Connecticut or Massachusetts or New York,
you have to choose.
You have to pre-register as a Democrat by a certain time, and then you can vote.
In New York State, it was
and independents, by the way, are left
in advance,
having no voice whatsoever.
Wow, yeah, exactly.
So the point you're making is that Bernie Sanders, when there are independents involved in deciding who's going to be the candidate, he's the candidate.
Yep. And by the way, the independents, I think, are the critical thinkers. So even if you give each side their 100% of the Republican vote and 30% of Hillary vote, when the independents get involved, guess what? Bernie wins.
And on the other side of that coin, I think it's safe to say, and it's a sad but true note, that Hillary Clinton does very poorly among independents, not just independents that have voted in the Democratic primaries, but independents overall. So that does not bode well, and that's why you're seeing these polls that have come out. And this is nothing new. They've been doing polling about head-to-head matchups all through this series of primaries and caucuses from back in January. That when you put Hillary Clinton up against any of the Republican candidates, which of course have winnowed down from 18 down to 1, and you put Bernie Sanders up against any of the Republican candidates, whether it be in the beginning when they were 18 or now down to 1, and you look at state by state matchups, Bernie Sanders always does significantly better against the Republican candidate than Hillary Clinton. That's something that you just can't avoid. It's a fact. And for a long time, media would say, well, it's because nobody knows who Bernie Sanders is. Anybody at this point that doesn't know who Bernie Sanders is, after all this that's gone on through these primaries and caucuses, they got to have their head in the ground. Everybody knows who Bernie Sanders is.
No, believe it or not,
they've heard
who don't.
Well, I don't think there are very many of them.
It's amazing. It's amazing, David. It's like, Hillary's been running since the 90s.
Basically,
okay?
yeah.
So her name recognition is forever.
Right.
Yeah.
But Bernie's only run for a year. And yet, look at the progress he made. He started at 3%.
Right.
Okay? She started at 60% or
Right.
better.
Yep.
Now the curves are coming like this. Okay? Bernie's coming up, she's coming down. Okay? And they're within like 2 or 3 points based on the latest poll.
Yeah, and a lot of them show that he's actually amongst Democratic Party voters. He's even with the independents factored in amongst Democratic Party voters, he does better than her. And that again is reflected in polls and head-to-head matchups.
And really what's happening is that Bernie's running out of time.
Yeah.
Okay, if he had another 6 months or so,
Right.
it would have been a whole different ball.
But where do we go from here?
Yes.
It's November, I don't know, we vote on the 4th or the 5th or whatever that Tuesday is. Where do we go from there?
Well, I think what we need to do is continue with the platform, okay? Rather than hang our hopes on one particular candidate, we look at the platform and get people involved that support that platform. Okay, because the platform is really, Bernie's platform is excellent, okay? fieldofbern.org, excellent way of presenting it, but also there's a lot of detail.
Okay, we're going to have to cut it off there. Thank you very much for joining us, Henry, our expert on all things Bernie Sanders.
Oh, there's a lot more experts than me.
Well, I think we did really well getting you on. We've had some other great Sanders supporters on, and all in all, pretty good group of people. You're here, so we'll make you the best.
Okay.
Yes,
We'll name you the winner.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week. And see you next Wednesday.